Moses and the plagues of Egypt. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh to ask him to let God's people go so they could worship him in the wilderness. Pharaoh said,
"No."
He had a hard heart and would not let the people go. He wanted to keep the Israelites as his slaves. Pharaoh then told his taskmasters to make the Israelite slaves work even harder. Not only did the slaves have to make bricks, but they also had to find the straw they needed too. The Israelites had to work harder and harder. And when they didn't make enough bricks, the taskmasters beat them. The elders of Israel came to Moses and Aaron and began to complain how cruelly all the Israelites were being treated. They blamed Moses and Aaron for making their lives worse by telling Pharaoh that God had said he must let the slaves go. So Moses prayed to God and asked him why he had allowed Pharaoh to cause trouble for the Israelites, and why did he not rescue them? God answered that he would deliver them from the Egyptians, and bring them to a land he had promised to give them. In the promised land they would be free. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh again, and asked him to let God's people, the Israelites, go. To show God's power, Aaron threw the rod he was holding to the ground and it became a snake. Pharaoh's magicians used their magic to make their rods become snakes too. But Aaron's snake swallowed up the other snakes. God is more powerful than anyone, but even after seeing this miracle, Pharaoh refused to let God's people go. Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh again. This time Aaron struck the river Nile with his rod, and the water turned to blood, and all the drinking water in Egypt became blood red too. The magicians of Pharaoh used their magic to do the same thing. Pharaoh would not listen to God or let the Israelite slaves go. The water was turned to blood for 7 days, and then God caused another plague to come to Egypt. This time he commanded Aaron to stretch out his rod over all the rivers and streams. Suddenly frogs appeared, and sprang out all over the land. They were everywhere, even in Pharaoh's palace. Pharaoh begged Moses and Aaron to stop the plague of frogs, and they did, but Pharaoh would not listen to God and let his people go. So, God told Aaron to stretch out his rod again over all the dust of the land, and it turned into lice. The lice appeared on all the Egyptians, including their magicians, who warned Pharaoh,
"This is the work of God."
But Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let the Israelite slaves go. So, God sent Moses to warn Pharaoh that swarms of flies would pester him and all the people of Egypt, but no flies would appear in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived. Once again Pharaoh begged for the flies to be taken away, and God took them away, but he still refused to free the Israelite slaves. So, God sent another plague. All the animals of the Egyptians became ill and died, but the animals of the Israelites were kept safe. Even after all this, Pharaoh refused to obey God and let his people go. Next, God commanded Moses to take some ashes from a furnace and throw them in the air in front of Pharaoh. Horrible boils appeared on all the Egyptians, and the magicians suffered so much from them. They could not stand before Moses. But still Pharaoh refused to free the Israelite slaves. So next God sent a plague of big hailstones to rain down on the places where the Egyptians lived, but not on Goshen, where the Israelite slaves lived. The big hailstones destroyed the animals belonging to the Egyptians. But even after this terrible storm, Pharaoh still refused to let the slaves go. So God sent another plague on the Egyptians because of Pharaoh's disobedience. A swarm of locusts covered the whole land and ate all the fruit on the trees and herbs and everything green in the fields. But even after all the crops were eaten, Pharaoh shook his head and said,
"No,"
to releasing the slaves. So God told Moses to stretch out his hand, and deep darkness covered the land of Egypt for 3 days. But in the land of Goshen, where the Israelite slaves lived, they enjoyed the sunlight. Pharaoh knew that God was more powerful than anyone or anything, but still he refused to let God's people go. There had been 9 plagues so far. What would God do next?